Well, hello, folks. We're back in the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Last week we talked about politics, and since we're kind of on a roll here, I think since we're talking about controversial stuff, let's talk about the devil.
Yeah. Yeah, this mythical
Who
figure.
sang the song "Superstitious"?
Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder. I've been trying to think of that.
Stevie Ray Vaughan covered it, though. He did a great
yeah,
job.
yeah. Stevie Wonder
he
did a
did
good
a great
job.
job.
I kind of want to talk about supernatural today.
Yeah, the unseen world.
The unseen world.
The invisible world.
Yeah, it's a good day to talk about it because it is a day where our culture, at least, participates in this cultural phenomenon called Halloween.
October 31st. We're
Yeah.
recording it right now as we speak on October 31st.
Yeah, so this will come out later, obviously, but your kids will have already ate bags of candy, I assume.
Dressed up like chickens and heroes and superheroes.
Right, yeah. And the church, I don't honestly understand or even know, I haven't dug into the history of the church around All Hallows Eve or All Saints Day, or I know it exists as a Catholic holiday, previous to the iteration that we have today, where it's more about Marvel superheroes or people trying to dress up as zombies or something scary. Yeah. But it is a day where everyone thinks about the supernatural. Even the skeptic who doesn't believe in it dresses up as something.
Yeah. It's interesting, having lived in Latin America for all those years, it's a very big deal. Not the 31st, but the 1st.
Yeah.
And the 1st is celebrated as the Day of the Dead. And I believe it had its origins in Spain, but it's been kind of syncretized over the years, mixed with indigenous religions and so forth, and then picked up by modern nations. But men, in where we lived, November 1st was I think, besides Mother's Day, the most profitable day if you were a florist.
Oh,
they
really?
sold
For
more flowers on November 1st than only Mother's Day would beat that.
Is this for graves?
Yeah, so the idea is that on November 1st, the Day of the Dead, all your deceased relatives come back for one day, and you can have lunch or share a meal or whatever. And so you'll see, where we lived was just down the street in Mexico from a large graveyard, and you would just see, mid-afternoon, later afternoon, hundreds and hundreds of people streaming towards the graveyard.
Wow.
And they would put up, picnic blankets and chairs, and they would sit around the graves of their ancestors and have a meal, share a meal together. And it was, and again, some of it was obviously just traditions of their forefathers, and some of it was pretty sincere.
I didn't know this. And I've never watched. There's a pretty famous. Is it Pixar?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I don't know anything about it.
It's actually, if you want to understand some of the culture of Latin America and that Day of the Dead, that's a great movie. The name escapes me as we speak, but it's a powerful movie. Okay. But the idea, though, is interesting because there's this sort of bedrock belief that Uncle Johnny is still around, but the curtain is only thin enough on November 1st to actually have a conversation.
Yeah. So it's a cultural agreement that there is an afterlife.
Absolutely.
Whether it's one that jives with the Bible that they come back or not. Yeah. There is there's a kind of an open door in this moment to talk about, hey, there is an afterlife. Yeah. Uncle is somewhere. Yeah. Where are you going to be?
Yeah.
In China, there's a thing called the grave sweeping festival, or the grave. Every year, it's really, really big. It's a very big deal. Tomb sweeping festival, and everyone goes out to the tombs and they clean the tombs, and they bring with them. You're familiar with the terracotta warriors, the life-size clay statues. There's this idea that you can lay up things for the afterlife, and that the emperors used to do it. They would make an entire city out of clay, and then that would be there waiting for them in the afterlife. That was their belief. Yeah. They were sincerely mistaken in that, but that was their belief. And so that kind of still holds on today, and people would bring like little papier-mâché cars, little papier-mâché, just things, and pieces of paper that looked like money but weren't money, and they would all take them down to the grave so that they would have those things in the afterlife. But hello, Dad, we got you a new car. Yeah. And then that would meet them in the afterlife.
Right, you look at some of the Middle East, Egypt is obviously probably the best example of just, tons of literal wealth, gold that has been buried and sent on with the deceased pharaohs or whoever they
Yeah.
were, that they're going to need, supposedly, the
Right.
idea is they're going to need this in the afterlife.
So
It's funny that gold actually turned out to be stolen by modern day thieves,
that is true.
grave robbers, and so forth.
yeah, that is very true. Or resides now in museums and other
Yeah,
places. If it
yeah.
wasn't robbed by them, it was robbed by
Yeah.
historians.
Right,
We
yeah,
have that now.
yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's culturally that exists. But what about? Are we naive? Are we foolish to think that there is an afterlife and a devil?
Yeah.
Because I would say that there are Christians who go down this road of modernism so far that they are, I believe in Jesus, which is a very supernatural thing to believe, because to say I have a belief in Jesus, you don't just believe that he was, but that he rose from the grave.
Yeah.
Which is
you can't have a cafeteria style Jesus where you pick and choose the parts you like.
That's the most supernatural thing you could do, is conquer death.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to the rest of the supernatural in the Bible, or the unseen world of the Bible, they tend to modernize it. Nobody's really demon possessed anymore. They just have psychological problems or mental problems, which also exist. This isn't us talking about not taking your medicine or not paying attention to your mental health, but they would rather not pay attention to the spirit world. And I just wonder if we could talk about that a little bit today.
I think it's interesting how it's sort of there's like this fundamental starting point, in my opinion, in the sense that I have to ask the question, and it's almost like a worldview question that we talk about so much, like where did the seen world come from? And that's a question scientists, with all of its amazing ability and capability, hasn't been able to answer.
No, they haven't.
Now, they've got some ideas and theories of evolutionary theories or explosions and so forth. But this question of where did all of it, the material world that I touch and feel and interact with, where did it all come from? And of course, from a Christian worldview, we believe that the Bible says, in the beginning, God.
Yes.
So before anything was here, in the beginning, God, he created the heavens and the earth. And
There has to be something uncreated and eternal.
Yeah.
There has to be something. And so you're either going to believe that's the material world and it's just been around forever and it's uncreated, which is a pretty wild thing to try to wrap your head around. Or you can believe that there is a being
You're right.
and a
designer.
personality, a designer that has always been around and has designed things.
So that brings up the kind of the part B to the question. If I go down that road of or just say I'm at least entertaining the two options, an invisible world created a visible world, or an uncreated world created a created world, so to speak. Which one is more real? Which one is more eternal, more lasting? So, and which one informs my everyday decisions more?
Right.
The unseen world, and of course now in our, like you said, our modern sort of environment that we're living in is, if I can't prove it, then it doesn't exist. It only exists if I can prove it. That's a generalization, but I only believe what I can see or measure or touch or understand. But the unseen world has the sort of the trump card in that if it's eternal, the created being is never going to totally understand it.
I want to read a quote here by Carl Sagan. He's passed away now. He was a science popularist. He would take hard concepts and make them more understandable. He wrote books like Cosmos. He wrote Contact, which is a science fiction book, which became a pretty famous movie. That was kind of him trying to explain spirituality as best as he could.
Yeah, he was like the spokesperson for
he was
the invisible world.
Complete materialist and a modernist, but he tried to turn science into a religion towards the end of his life called scientism, which is a pretty funny thing to do. But he wrote this book. The book is called The Demon Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. The Demon Haunted World. He says this: I have a foreboding of an America in my children's or grandchildren's time, when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes are critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide, almost without noticing, back into superstition and darkness.
Yeah.
He's describing like, oh no, we might start to believe in the unbelievable again.
Yeah.
Like we had a in his mind, we had a bright, shining moment of materialism.
Right. Yeah.
And we're letting it slip away, and people are starting to begin to believe again in the spiritual. And he's afraid that means there will also be a decline in manufacturing, in technologies, and in people to even be able to understand those things. He's talking about a new dark age.
It's interesting to me. You and I both have worked in other countries, and seen, experienced, I guess, interacted with different worldviews. And in America, we have a very materialistic, and when we use the word materialistic, we're not talking about I just collect stuff, like in the sense of materialism, like economic, but we're talking about, again, a physical world. There is no
Right.
spiritual sense or aspect to it at all. But you and I have worked in a lot of other countries where the spiritual world is very, very real, not just because they believe it, but because of what we see. Right?
Yeah.
And that, we talked about visiting the graves and things like that. But I think it has implications, right? That if I believe. So what I'm saying, getting at here is like there's this moral putting you on the hook sort of a thing.
Right.
That if I don't believe in the invisible world, if I don't believe in a creator God or some other being, then it's just me and my decisions, and let us eat, drink, and be merry.
How do you explain evil if you don't believe in it? And how do you explain good?
Yeah.
If you don't believe in the unseen world, if you've decided, even as a Christian, well, I believe in God, but I'm not going to really believe in the devil. I'm not going to deal with that belief.
Yeah.
It'll just it'll live in the back of my head. Maybe there is one, but I'm not going to act as if. I'm not going to act on that belief.
Yeah.
Then what do you do with evil? How do you explain the 9/11s?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
The senseless, crime and so forth that don't seem to have any explanation. But what I was going at earlier is this idea that if there is an unseen world, then that puts a weight of accountability on me. And I think all religions, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, all the religions have this sense of what I do in this life is going to impact what happens in the next life. And I think with good reason. But if I don't want to deal with my own accountability, then it's the easiest thing to do is to say, well, it just doesn't exist. But like you said, we're haunted. We're haunted by evil when we see it.
Yeah.
Now the media or modern people are afraid to use that word evil because it has a moral connotation, right? It has this sense of that was right and this is absolutely wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And there's going to be justice, or there's going to be. We see that in our world today.
Yeah.
There's this huge debate about whether anybody's actually guilty, even though the crimes they commit, well, there was an excuse for it or there was a reason for it. But it's hard for somebody to say that was evil, unless it's the victims.
Right.
When their victims are facing their perpetrators in court, you often hear them say, "What you did, you are an evil person." Now the judge wouldn't say that,
right?
And but you are an evil person.
Yeah, there used to. I remember when it was first, kind of introduced the idea of someone can be innocent by reason of mental incapacity or mental insanity. They said, well, look, what this person did wasn't really evil because they didn't have the ability to understand what they did.
Yeah.
And I can wrap my head around that. I can make sense of that. But it has been stretched now into nothing is ever anybody's fault.
Well, yeah.
That they have no moral choice. It was because we're living in a deterministic, materialistic world. And so it was determined from the beginning because of the mother and the father that he had and the circumstances in which he grew up, that this is what he was going to be. He didn't choose to be this. He became this because of this. There's this movie. Have you ever watched Silence of the Lambs?
Years ago, that was an old movie.
Yeah, when it first came out,
Jodie
I
Foster
watched it. I don't know if I'd ever rewatch it, but I did watch it when it first came out.
But it dealt with the question.
It did. There's a moment in that movie. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get it perfectly right because again, I haven't seen it since I was pretty young. But Jodie Foster is going down into this prison cell to meet Hannibal Lecter, who is one of the big bad guys in the movie. Serial killer, cannibal. They tried to write a character as bad as you could be.
The worst of the worst.
But also incredibly, incredibly intelligent. So you couldn't just say, like, well, he's just a monster because he seems to have as good or better faculties than anybody he deals with. He's smarter than everyone he deals with.
There's intent, there's ability.
And when she's going down there, she asks the question, what happened to him? And he overhears her say that. And he says, can't I just be evil? Can't you just call me evil? Something to that effect.
Right.
Like, can't you just call me evil?
Yeah.
Like, why does it have to be that something happened to me?
Yeah.
Why is that? In other words, there's these two worldviews, at play here in this fictional story. And her worldview is that this is something that happened to him, as opposed to this is something that he chose to be or do, and that there's a real evil in him.
As pastors, we work with situations over our careers, over decades of doing ministry. You and I have been in maximum security prisons. I've ministered in those prisons. I have I've been in and out of and dealt with incarcerated men and women. And they will tell you there was something at play in my life. Now, the ones typically that we've worked with were we were going in and we were doing a Bible study, or we were meeting with an individual, and for the most part, they were believers. They were, but their lives were train wrecks because of decisions they made, and they would tell you that. Man, something was influencing me. Maybe there was substance abuse, but there was something mysterious, call it whatever you will, invisible, that was influencing my decisions. Maybe it was an abusive father. Maybe it was an exposure to some kind of perversion, or some kind of something that destroyed their lives.
Yeah. The supernatural, because again, that's where we're going and talking about today. So let's get nitty gritty and talk about the supernatural. Where have you seen the supernatural? Because I know there's been moments like that where I talk to someone and I know there's evil here, but it's not like a horror movie where someone climbs up a wall,
right?
Or their head turns around so many times or something. But I've also seen supernatural. I've seen supernatural in the good. I've seen people be healed.
Yeah,
I've seen like that.
Yeah.
There's no materialistic explanation for this. God healed somebody. I've seen the supernatural in a salvation, that they became a new person. They went from death to life.
Right.
And they were changed. And there have been a few instances where I've seen evil manifest as well. You want to talk about that? Have you ever seen?
I mean, I have, again, life experiences, and maybe it's just anecdotal if you hear it that way, but I have been with people who, on one hand, you think of the stories, the life of Jesus, who he went around healing the sick, raising the dead, and casting out demons, delivering those, it says, Mark, I believe, says, who were oppressed by demons. And so the one instance is when the demon shows up in the synagogue, and he's crazy, or the man among the tombs cutting himself, and Jesus doesn't say that he needed therapy. Jesus, not therapy's wrong, but Jesus cast the demon out of that guy. And then the common people who observed it happen said, well, there he is. And what does it say? He's sitting in his right mind. He's just listening to Jesus like a normal person. So obviously something dramatic has taken place. And it wasn't a program that he was in for a year. It wasn't some rehabilitation.
Right.
It was instantaneous. Jesus brought to bear on the power of darkness a greater power of light.
Right.
And I think I've seen that on the good sense of a person who was very, very dark, who was involved in some destructive behaviors, whose life was chaotic and all manner, and all of a sudden they had an encounter with Jesus, and they're free of their substance, they're free of their anger. It's almost like the darkness has lifted and light is. So I've seen that on one hand, but I've also, on the other hand, seen people who started off relatively stable, and they exposed or opened the door, however you want to describe it, of their lives to all kinds of dark stuff. Now, when I say dark stuff, well, I'm not talking about maybe conjures up images of Star Wars or something like that, the dark side. But listen, this passage of Scripture is out of John 3. It says, this is the judgment, that light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. That passage in John 3:19, that light came into the world, but people loved the darkness rather than light. And the reason they loved the darkness, there was this allegiance, this affinity, I love darkness because my deeds are evil. For anyone who does wicked things hates the light.
As you read that, I was thinking too, there's no better account of evil or proof of evil than the fact that we tried to kill the light.
Right.
That when ultimate good came into the world, who did nothing but good in every interaction, in every way, only did good. The response by the world, the response by the power of the world was to kill him.
Yeah.
Like we can't let this live here. We can't let this, that response was we have to kill this man. Both the religious, powers and the economic and the political powers all scheme together to say this has to end.
And Jesus described that in the last few hours of his life. He said the hour of darkness has come. So, and what was he referring to? He's referring to a man who would sell him for 30 pieces of silver, but ultimately he was referring to a group of people that hated him so much. I think it's important to remember that. They didn't just, it wasn't like a crime of spontaneity. It was a deliberate, we hate you so much, we're going to scheme to take your life, and we're going to carry it through. We'll let the Romans do the dirty work, but we hate you. So hatred is darkness.
It is. I see that in Stephen's martyrdom too.
Yeah.
They gnashed their teeth. They were just... And all he was doing was preaching a gospel of peace, a gospel of forgiveness, a gospel of reconciliation. But he had to point out in that you need to be reconciled. You are evil in your deeds, and you must come to the light. And that calling out of evil just made them hate him so much that they had to kill him. And that's just pretty amazing. That I guess too, in the back of my mind is something else I'm thinking about as well, and lives in this topic, is the entertainment factor that we live in today around Halloween and evil and all that. We get a lot of questions about what we do here as far as a harvest carnival or a community carnival and what that looks like. We're not celebrating evil, but we are giving kids a place to come and be safe on that day. But there are people with different convictions around that even within our staff, they're like, yeah, we want to do this, or no, I don't want to participate at all. And there's a lot to be said about that. But where I'm getting at is, if you've really seen evil and had to deal with evil, ever had to rebuke evil, I'm not easily entertained by evil.
No.
I don't enjoy it. Now, I'm not saying I love a good action story, good versus bad, right? I'm a child of the 80s where at the time, Russia was the big bad. And so all the action movies were America versus Russia. And Russia was trying to do something wrong. That's now changed in Hollywood to a lot of it's terrorists. The terrorist is bad and something else is good. So I don't mind good versus bad stories. I like good versus bad stories. But the manifestation of evil in a story, I'm usually out. I'm like, okay, I'm not interested in this. It's not entertaining to me. I've seen it destroy lives.
When people who wrestle with this question, I think they can approach it very naively because they're never touched by it. They live in comfort. Their lives are protected by layers of cushions of whether that's an economic cushion or something like that, and until something punches them. I think the great statesman and spokesman Mike Tyson, what did he say? He said, everybody's got a great plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah, that's true.
And so you have this philosophy of, evil is just a concept or something, but every once in a while, life punches you in the face.
Yes.
I had that experience a decade or so ago when a close family member was killed in a shooting that was absolutely senseless.
Right.
The perpetrator killed 2 young boys, and he killed 2 policemen. It was a huge thing in the U.S. It was down in the Southwest. And I had to go down to that spot. I had to go to that crime scene. I had to comfort my family members. I did the memorial for this young boy, and thousands of people were there. But while we were there, it was still a very much, it was in the forefront of the news. And the man who did it, when you listen to him, because it was just, there's no explanation for it other than evil. Right. There's something that, and I'll use the word, and I know it's a buzzword, there was something that possessed him.
Yeah.
He was under the authority of something extremely dark. And I think that's the reason, maybe that's the practical piece today is, listen, ideas have power.
Yes.
And if there is an invisible world, if Paul describes very clearly there's a war of good and evil. Paul said, hey, beware the devil's schemes, put on the full armor of God. Well, if I was a scheming, conniving devil, one of the best schemes would be to get people not to believe in me.
Let's read that verse. Finally, be strong in the Lord, in the strength of His might. So there's a call by Paul to the church in Ephesus, like you need to be strong.
Yeah.
There's a reason why you don't have to be strong for no reason.
Yeah, there's something going on.
He says, put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. Then he goes on to describe kind of what that looks like. And he says here, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So he's also saying, first of all, schemes, the word behind it in Greek is methods.
Right.
So there's a plan, there's a
planning
method to destroy.
Yeah.
And then he gives them personalities even, and almost like hierarchy. Rulers, authorities, cosmic powers over the present darkness of the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. That it's not just ideas.
Yeah.
It's not just memes. It's there are personalities behind this that are at war, and that if you're only fighting at the flesh and blood level, you're missing it. Now, I don't think Paul would say here, I don't think what he's trying to say is that there's no flesh and blood wrestling, because he himself says in other places, I wrestled with this man who tried to throw me out, not like physically wrestling with him, but there was a battle with this man who did not want me in this city with this, and it was evil, and he was evil. But I know it wasn't just him. There was a power and a principality over him, using him to try to run the gospel out of the city.
Yeah.
So I think we're so vulnerable if we don't pay attention to this fact, if we don't pray this and see this.
Isn't it interesting, that word you use, principality, that's kind of we don't use that word very much, but a word we are familiar with is municipality.
Yeah.
And a municipality is a section of a city, or maybe it's an entire suburb, and it's governed by a certain police force or a city council or something, a municipality. Yeah. Well, a principality was a force of some kind that was over a piece of real estate.
Right.
So you think about that concept, so there's regional evil. Mm-hmm. There's, and don't we does this sometimes intersect with our? Yeah. We go into a certain part of the city. We park our car, but we're very, very careful to make sure it's locked.
Yeah.
Why? Because all we know is cars get broken into all the time. Now that's a kind of a simple example, but if we didn't believe in evil,
where's that coming from?
Yeah.
Why are cars getting broken into here and not over here?
Why are certain areas just full of prostitution? Why are certain sides of the city have a higher crime rate and a higher violence rate? Poverty, other things, And I believe now again, it attracts a group of people that are in sort of unity, if you will.
Yeah.
Because evil looks for followers, agreements. Yeah.
That's interesting, because I don't know if I would have believed this as deeply as I believe what we're talking about if I hadn't traveled to other cultures.
Yes.
If I hadn't been to other places. And if you ever talk to anyone who's even been on a short-term missions trip and landed in another place, they will say, like, just in getting off of the plane, like, man,
it's got a weird sense of this. Yeah.
Something feels heavy. Something feels different. And I'm not saying other places are darker than America.
No.
I'm saying they're different personalities.
Absolutely.
It's different feelings. It's different struggles. If you've ever visited, a communist country, like, man, there's a spirit of control here.
I feel oppression.
Yeah, I feel like...
fear.
And then it was reflected in, wow, everything is gray concrete block. Like, it comes at... It affects your creativity. It affects the way you build. It affects the way you think and do commerce. It affects everything.
We've done outreach. I've done on missions trips down to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Rio de Janeiro is a beautiful place, right on the beach, right in the ocean, but it's also famous for probably the biggest party in the world every year. And it's Carnival, which is right before the beginning of Lent. And when you go there, and I remember being in the streets, and some of it's parades and color, but a lot of it is just absolute lust and immorality and fleshliness. Yeah. And you literally can feel something in the atmosphere.
Yeah, I would argue that a blind man would feel it, even if he didn't see what was in front of him, that there was being tempted. I argue that he would 100% feel that.
Yeah, and who hasn't seen the actions of a mob? A mob is maybe a nucleus of people that start something, but they attract a whole group, and it becomes this destructive lynch mob or destructive mob. Well, what's happened there? I think they've opened their lives up to something that can't be explained. Now, here's the deal. I think so. Mystery. If you don't believe, let's just say you don't believe in God, And if you don't believe in God, you almost have to not believe in evil. But yet, all around you are things happening that demand an explanation. So just to say, I don't believe it, that's just not fair.
Sure.
So if you don't believe in God, that's fine. But then where does this evil come from?
Yeah.
I mean, what's behind it all? And more importantly, what's the answer?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I want to read one more thing here, and then I got another question for you. This is from a book called The Death of Satan, How Americans Have Lost the Sense of Evil. And this is, again, like Carl Sagan, from a secularist materialist who does not believe in the spirit world.
Yeah.
But like another man, I can't think of his name right now, but he wrote a fascinating article. He's a novelist, and he wrote an article, and in the article he said, I don't believe in God, and I miss him.
Right.
Like I've lost something in not believing in God. I wish I had that to believe in to make sense of the world, but unfortunately I'm too smart to believe in it, kind of thing. So this guy is basically saying in his book, I don't believe in Satan, but I miss him. We need him as a culture, is what he's trying to say. So this is a little wordy, but follow me. We live in the most brutal century in human history, but instead of stepping forward to take the credit, the devil has rendered himself invisible. The very notion of evil seems incompatible with modern life, from which the ideas of transgression and the accountable self are fast receding. In other words, he's saying the idea of transgression and accountability are going away. You no longer hold people accountable because we no longer believe in evil.
Yeah, that's where we started. Yeah.
Yet, despite this loss of old words and moral concepts, Satan, sin, and evil, we cannot do without some conceptual means for thinking about the universal human experience of cruelty and pain. My driving motive in writing this book has been the conviction that if evil, with all its insidious complexities, escapes the reach of our imagination, it will actually establish dominion over us.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is a secularist saying, if we stop believing in evil, we will become evil.
Yeah.
Period.
Think about it. If someone, I don't want to over dramatize this, but if someone steals my car that I worked hard for, that I paid for, that sweat equity in the car, or someone breaks into my home and steals something, someone hurts one of my loved ones, I instinctively want it to stop, and I want justice. I either want my car back, or I want the person who hurt my loved one to be stopped from hurting anybody else. Maybe I even want him punished. I want a pound of flesh. Yeah. Well, where does that impulse come from? If there is no God, there's no argument for whether what he did was right or wrong. Yeah. I heard a scientist, well, not a scientist, some of the new atheists in some of their books, one guy used a term that said, maybe we're just all dancing to our DNA. Well, try that out on someone who's in deep grief because they have suffered at the hands of a murderer or a thief or a rapist, and just say, well, you really shouldn't hold him responsible because he or she was just dancing to their DNA. It's incompatible. We say it. It sounds good as long as we don't have to experience getting punched in the face.
It reminds me very much of a story of a friend of mine I used to have. We used to work together years ago, and he used to do a lot of apologetics on college campuses. And he ran across a man who basically said, I don't believe basically in reality. Like we imagine our own reality. I'm imagining mine and you're imagining yours. And my friend's response was to reach across and to squeeze his nose and not let go.
Yeah.
And the guy says, let go of my nose. He said, I don't have a hold of your nose. You're imagining I've got your nose. That's all.
Oh, goodness.
And I say that because it reminds me, like, if someone were to say, like, I just believe we're dancing to our DNA, I would want to just punch him in the face.
Yeah.
And as he got angry, I'm saying, hey, what?
I don't know why you're so upset.
I was made to do that.
Yeah.
I had no choice but to do that. Yeah. I'm dancing to my DNA.
And you see how in our culture today, how this whole idea of I don't believe in evil, it meshes so easily with rugged individualism, where everybody has a right to do their thing and no one should be held accountable. I mean, in our justice system today, isn't that people offend or they break laws and they're turned right around and put back on the streets. And that's not the argument entirely here this morning, but there's this sense of, hey, somebody should stop this. Well, the question is, why? Well, why? Is because it's wrong. Well, why is it wrong? Well, if there is no God, you're back to this impasse of can I call anything right or wrong if there is no moral referee?
Right. Okay, so what if we try to tie these two things together, last week's podcast, this week's podcast, and the sermon in between? We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against rulers, against authorities, against these things. We believe that to be true. But we're also saying people should vote. Is that incompatible? Or is that compatible? Are we, if we're wrestling against flesh and blood, then that's one way. But if we wrestle against principalities and powers, how do we put those
reconcile
two things
those
together?
two things? Yeah, that's a great question. I think Jesus, he said in the Gospel of John, he said, "I am the light of the world, and he that follows me will not walk in darkness." Jesus said that while he was on planet Earth, a literal planet Earth, a physical planet Earth. He was a human being in a human body who had to eat, sleep, wash, and all those kinds of things. So the two worlds are experienced at the same time. So we live in a world that in our country that is in this part of the geographical location, but it also has systems in place,
Right.
Justice systems and political systems, and we can participate in those. Yeah. But what we don't do is make an idol out of those things and say, this is the answer to evil, because history has shown that there is no system on this earth, whether it's capitalism or communism or Buddhism or whatever, that deals with the question of evil, I think, like the gospel. So in the meanwhile, we participate in planet Earth. We vote because we have an opportunity to say yes to healthy policies, to policies of justice and policies of equity and policies that alleviate suffering and prevent corruption. And if we abstain, if we don't get involved in those, in that opportunity, I think, again, we're not living in a neutral universe. I think evil fills the vacuum. If you want to see an example of this, dear Lord, just look around at communist countries. You look around at dictatorships where people either haven't never had the opportunity or they just have become passive. But you watch the resistance. Venezuela is a good example of this. I mean, Venezuela used to be this incredibly prosperous, wealthy, modern, and people with bad ideas, I think dark ideas, I think selfish and sinful and corrupt ideas have, Proverbs says righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people.
You used a word there that I would argue is one of the spirits that we wrestle with is passivity.
Yeah.
I think passivity is a spirit that has to be identified. Like, am I walking in the Spirit of Christ? Am I walking in the Holy Spirit? Or am I walking in passivity?
Checked out.
Yeah. And you could also, you could swing on the other side of that pendulum. If passive is one side, one error of I'm not participating, I'm not trying to bring the gospel to bear on the world around me. The other maybe pendulum swing would be anger or violence.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not even going to vote, or I'm going to storm the Capitol.
Right.
Maybe I shouldn't use that example, but I'm going to stay home and just whine about things and complain online, or I'm going to go downtown and break windows and protest. Rather than what is the gospel response to these situations?
Classic a quote attributed to Edmund Burke: "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing."
Right.
So we have to decide, do I believe that I'm not living in a morally neutral universe? There are forces at play that want to take ground, that are after human souls. That's the prize.
Yeah. Men
and women created in the image of God. And if I believe that battle is real, then what do I need to do to align myself with the light of the world? And like you mentioned movies and everything else, I mean, there are certain practices and there are certain decisions I make. Any addict will tell you, when I was exposed to pornography at an early age, when I was exposed to drugs, it's like something got a hold of my life. They'll use different verbiage, but they'll talk about something got a hold of my life and began to influence my decisions. So,
yeah, it is really interesting. I'm in an integrity group right now, and in that integrity group, it's amazing how many of them are saying, like, you know what, I've decided I've got to say no to this too, and no to this too, and no to this too, because they were all these little gateways. There were all these little ways,
gateway's a good word,
basically, in which I was opening up to the flesh, to be selfish. And then as soon as I open up to the flesh, I've opened up to the enemy, basically. And then it flooded in. And so now I'm having to go around and shut all these doors that that maybe other people don't even have to shut. One of the guys was like, I'm letting go of caffeine. I just realized it's an addiction with me. And while it might not, be the most harmful addiction, I just can't say yes to any addictions right now. So I'm shutting the door on this, for now. And we were all like, hey, wow, that's awesome. That's good, because he was saying no to the flesh and yes to
And
God.
those people, a guy that makes that kind of a decision, he's not walking around seeing a demon under every
Right.
coffee table or something like that. Paul said, walk wisely. We walk. He uses an old word there, circumspectly. We're aware of the nature of the battle, the nature of life, the nature of human beings. And so anybody who works or has worked in law enforcement would totally get this, even when they're off duty. They walk in a certain way, they sit in a restaurant in a certain way, that they're always aware of the broken world that they're helping serve.
So we should pray. We should be aware of the spirit world.
Yeah.
We this isn't a class, so we don't really have time to unpack all of that. But is there any books you would recommend? If someone's like, okay, I hear what you guys are saying. Maybe I've been overly unattentive to the spirit world, and it's pushed me around because I haven't paid attention to it. And I didn't cue you up for this, so I don't know what you have in your head, but do you have anything you would tell people, start here, read this, do this?
A classic is Spiritual Warfare by Dean Sherman.
Dean Sherman, friend of ours.
That book is probably 30 years old, but I think it's very succinct. It's very easy to read, but and again, if you read it carefully, it'll tend to make you think outside maybe the box that you've been in. That's a great one.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
I would encourage people to look up Michael Heiser. Check him out on YouTube maybe first before you buy his books. Some of his books can be kind of dense. They're very worth reading. But look up Michael Heiser and The Unseen World, The Unseen Realm.
Oz Guinness has a book, I think it's called The Problem with Evil. I may not have the title right, but if you just, Amazon Oz Guinness, he's got one on the problem of evil. That's one of the best books I've ever read.
Yeah. I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't think you spend as much time maybe in podcasts as I do. I like to listen to podcasts when I get a chance, and some of them are maybe I'll only listen to them once or twice, and I'll pass them along. But there is a huge interest right now in the supernatural.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really huge. And I think it lives in this world of UFOs. There's so much, goodness, so many people are talking about UFOs right now. There's a ton of interest in Bigfoot right now.
He's had a resurgence.
He's had a resurgence. Back. Just look up, just type in Bigfoot in podcasts, and you will see so many podcasts just about Bigfoot. And there's a lot of interest in giants right now.
Yeah.
Which it's not that like it's ever gone away, but I have more church members coming up and asking me about Nephilim than ever before.
Right.
About Genesis 6. So what does it mean that the sons of God, had
relations, right?
Relations with the women and
what
mighty men. What does all this mean? And there's a huge interest in it right now, which I think is good, for the most part. But although there's a direction in which we can just become interested in the supernatural and miss the point, because it's interesting, it's fun. Like maybe Bigfoot's out there, maybe UFOs are real. Are there giants still in the world today, or is that only in biblical times? All that kind of stuff. But it can just become this tantalizing, fun thing that we think about and talk about, and we don't actually engage in the real battle.
Like playing with a Ouija board.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a form of playing with almost treating the scripture as this, like, oh, let's look for the crazy supernatural in here, and find it, because it's in there. Yeah. You can't choose to strip the Bible of the supernatural. Several people have done it. Isaac Asimov has. I think Benjamin Franklin had a version of the Bible. Thomas Jefferson maybe. Yeah. And they tried to take out the supernatural of the Bible, but you just lose all of it if you lose the supernatural. Yeah. You can't help it.
It won't be dissected.
There are giant fish that swallow people, and there's nothing you can do about it. I'm sorry. You can try to figure that out and explain it away. And there were definitely been times in my life when I've been less comfortable with it. But the older I've got, the more comfortable I've got with it. Yeah. I'm just good with all of it that's in there. If that's what it says, then that's what it means. Now, you still need to read it in the context in which it was written and understand it that way. Some books are poetry and should be read as poetry. Some books are history. Yeah. But in the history books is a giant, so deal with it, okay? There's a giant in the history books. Deal with it.
I think you're describing the element of mystery. If I'm a hardcore non-believer, atheist, there is no invisible world, there is no God, everything can be explained scientifically. Well, that's just not totally true, because there's still mystery.
Right.
Science and the cosmos is full of mystery. We read all the time we actually have found a deeper part of the ocean, and we don't know what's down there. So there's mystery all around us. And for the believer, it doesn't clear up all the mysteries either. There's mystery. Was it a giant fish? Was it something else? And frankly, those are sort of, I think they're peripheral issues. They're not the main issue. But I'd like to end with that idea that Jesus, who was the miracle working Son of God, walked on the earth, raised the dead, healed the sick, delivered the demon possessed. He said, I'm the light of the world. And if you walk with me, you don't have to walk in darkness. And that's a great invitation that I'll take anytime.
That is a beautiful invitation. So if you want to go deeper, like Bruce said, read Spiritual Warfare by Dean Sherman. You can still find it on Amazon, I'm sure. A friend of ours, great guy.
Yeah. Os Guinness, Problem with Evil, I believe it's called.
Problem with Evil is great. Again, if you're looking for more scholarly information on that, Michael Heiser is a Bible teacher and a very wise man. He's worth paying attention to as well. All right. Well, fun, and not scary, I would say. Like a lot of the point of Halloween is to be scared.
Yeah.
But what I love about this is it's not scary because we're on God's side, we're on Christ's side, and so I can step into a
people
world.
of the light.
Yeah, people of the light. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys. I hope this has been an encouragement to you, or edifying to you in some ways. If you'd like to pass it on, then go ahead and do that.
Yeah. If you're a Yankees fan and you're mourning today, we're sorry for your loss. But somebody's got to win, someone's got to lose. So.
Yeah, and it was the Yankees' turn, huh?
Yeah. Wow. Tough one. Love you guys.
Yep. Bye.